problems we have. But we commend the work of UN institutions because they help us to
promote awareness.
Yes, to promote awareness and maybe to change approach of those internationally who are still complementary with Putin and his team. Because
let me just stop you there because I have one last question. I only have about 20 seconds left. Can you just address for us, without getting into anything that will endanger anybody, how you go about tracing and contacting Ukrainian children in Russia?
We use different ways, and I can't disclose this information publicly.
Fair enough. I wouldn't want you to do anything like that. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your testimony here today.
Thank you, Congresswoman Weil. We now proceed to the Vice Chairwoman, Ann Wagner of Missouri.
I thank my colleague, Congressman Wilson, for yielding me the time, and I thank Chairman McCall and Ranking Member Meeks for prioritizing this urgent matter. And Prosecutor General Costin, thank you for being here today. The testimony we heard prior to this hearing was devastating, and we are grateful for the work that you are doing to bring war criminals to justice. We cannot rest in our efforts to target all those in Russia who are complicit in the Kremlin's crimes, and it is my belief that culpability for the appalling atrocities that Russia has committed goes right to the very top. Putin and his cronies must pay for the indiscriminate and wanton violence they have unleashed on the Ukrainian people, including women and innocent children, the ill, infirmed, elderly, and the most vulnerable. I did, in fact, travel to the Ukraine-Poland border it was just over, I guess, a year ago, right, with many members on this committee, including Ms. Wild, as millions of Ukrainian civilians fled Putin's full-scale invasion. We met so many brave children and women making a terrifying journey from everything they had ever known and loved to become refugees in a strange country. And I hope and pray that many of these refugees have been able to return home and begin to put back together their lives in some way, shape, or form. But I have been heartbroken to see the reports that thousands of Ukrainian children have been kidnapped and forcibly deported to Russia. I will tell you, as a mother and a grandmother, this is absolutely chilling. Furthermore, it is genocidal, and I believe that the United States should lead the way in calling out Putin's regime for this unthinkable crimes. You are quite correct, sir, when you say that the world is watching, and I believe that history will judge us. Prosecutor General Costin, as you know, to constitute genocide, there must be a proven intent on the part of perpetrators to eliminate a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. Can you provide clear examples of Russia's genocidal intent to destroy the Ukrainian people?
Thank you. Thank you, Congressman Wagner, for your question. I don't want to read these quotes of Russians, but I will do it. Mm-hmm. Putin's former advisor Surkov, quote, "There is no Ukraine, there is Ukrainianism. That is to say, a peculiar disorder of mind surprisingly taken to extremes by a fascination with ethnography. Such bloody local history, a mess instead of a state. There is Borsh, Bandera, Bandura, and there is no nation." Surkov was not only one of the advisors of Putin. He was also involved in negotiations in trilateral contact group, so-called Minsk Agreement, Normandic format, which were held starting from 2014 until...
Have you presented this evidence to Secretary Blinken, and have you asked him to make a genocide determination? And if so, how did he respond?
Not yet at the moment.
I encourage you to do that, and I encourage this committee to do the same. What are your office's most significant challenges in investigating Russian war crimes and their atrocities committed in Ukraine since the full-scale invasion? And what additional U.S. support would most enhance your office's ability to investigate the tens of thousands of allegations of war crimes that you have received and facilitate effective prosecutions?
You know, the most challenging is to identify the perpetrators, especially in cases where the survivors have a physical contact. I mean, if they were forcibly detained, even not about sexual abuse or any torture, even in other war crimes, but where they saw these people. But if their people were protected, you know, but their faces were protected, it's not very easy to identify these perpetrators. In some cases, we have identified the military units. We have identified who was the commander of military unit, but we need also to identify the perpetrators. In other cases, like in intentional destroying or missile attacks against our critical civil infrastructure,
Right.
some of these attacks started thousands of kilometers far from our border by air forces of Russian Federation, because these missiles can fly thousands of kilometers. And the consequences of these attacks, you know, are in some cases tens of civilians killed, hundreds of civilians wounded. And we need to identify who gave coordinates of the object, who gave the order, and who initially pushed the button.
Well, certainly my time has expired. I appreciate the chair's indulgence, and I would just say this, that the U.S. must provide whatever technical resource support that we can to help you get these prosecutions, and I will yield back. Thank you again, sir, very much.
Thank you. And in this respect, once again, the sharing of intelligence information could be helpful to investigate such cases. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair Ann Wagner, for your passion. And we now proceed to Congresswoman Dina Titus of Nevada.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Prosecutor General, for your very compelling testimony and the people of Ukraine's resistance, resilience, heroism. It's impressed all the world, and certainly me and this body. We are hearing a lot, of course. The immediate news is what Russia is doing in Ukraine and the horrendous impact of its human suffering as a result of its war crimes. But, you know, we really shouldn't be surprised, because if you look at the history of Russia, it certainly confirms that they're likely doing it in Ukraine. You look at Mali, you look at Chechnya, you look at Syria, you look at Central African Republic. They've been charged with war crimes in all of those places. So what they're doing now is more immediate and certainly perhaps more involving children, but it's not surprising. This is a long history that they have. I would ask you, what about some of the independent agencies or NGOs? How helpful are they, and what could they be doing? Radio Free Europe, Red Cross, Amnesty International, Doctors Without Borders, are they there on the ground and being helpful?
First of all, thank you for mentioning Russia as a state who used to abuse and to international law and order. You mentioned actually some jurisdictions where Russia is actively acting against law and order globally, using their criminal groups like Wagner Group. Mm-hmm. And I think that this is a momentum where Europe, Ukraine, and United States, and all of our other allies should be united in order to put an end for such groups like Wagner Group, who are earning money illegally in some countries of Africa and use this money to kill our people in Ukraine, and use this money to support those members of Wagner Group who commit war crimes against our prisoners of war, against our civilians on occupied territories. So for this we need to be united. I think it's a momentum to do it. For the question you asked, we have a strongest support from the non-governmental and civil society organizations in Ukraine. We have a group under in my office, which is named the Group of International Experts, where we have 6 directions of activity with regard to investigation and prosecution of war crimes, starting from children, sexual violence, and others, including the protection of rights of media, of journalists who were killed and suffered during this war of aggression. Because we have internationally, we have foreign journalists who were also killed, and we're investigating these cases together with other my colleagues from other countries. But this group includes more than 40 NGOs and civil society organizations, and most of them are supported by grants from the United States and from European Union countries. And for this makes it possible for them to help us in documenting and prosecuting war crimes, to help to deal with victims and survivors, especially from vulnerable groups. And this work is extremely important. We are communicating with them on a permanent basis. I have a special envoy in my office who is communicating with all our NGOs and civil society organizations. So we are united with them, and their support is very important.
I'm glad to hear that. That's great. Let me ask you about some of Russia's allies, like Belarus. Are they engaged in this too, or should they be held accountable when all is said and done?
We have the citizens of Belarus who are identified as war criminals, and we have cases against them. Even some of them are already finished with conviction. I firmly remember about one case. And we, of course, for us, doesn't matter who from which country war criminal is.
Yeah.
If war crime is committed on Ukrainian land against Ukrainians, wherever, we indict and we convict all of them. Thank you.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Titus. We now proceed to Congressman Andy Barr of Kentucky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the witness, and I think your testimony here today demonstrates that Russian crimes against humanity in Ukraine, it's not just about supporting the Ukrainian resistance and the sovereignty of the Ukraine as a nation and as a people, but it's also about countering a systematic and widespread attack against civilization. That's what NATO assistance of Ukraine is about. It's about certainly supporting the Ukrainian resistance in defense of the freedom and sovereignty of Ukraine, but it's also a defense of humanity and civilization. And I commend your testimony here today. We know that throughout history, occupations are expensive, and that insurgencies are less expensive. Can you talk about whether Russia is prepared for a long conflict, and whether Russia has the ability militarily and economically to support a long-term occupation of a population that will fight them? And what has been the reaction of supposedly ethnic Russian people in the face of these war crimes in Ukraine?
Could you the last part of your question?
Yeah, so
you mean Russian ethnic people who are citizens of Ukraine?
Right. These supposedly Russian ethnic people, are they resisting? And does Russia have the capability of maintaining a long-term occupation of a population that is resistant to their occupation?
You know, when we are talking about the group of people who are potentially the victim of the crime of genocide, we are talking about Ukrainians as a nation. And doesn't matter the ethnicity of Ukrainians we are talking about. So all Ukrainians, once again, doesn't matter who are they by ethnicity. They are struggling for Ukrainians' sovereignty, freedom, and to liberate our country.
As you investigate Russian genocide, we know that the Chinese are supporting dual-use technology and sanctions evasion by Russia. China is also actively engaging in systematic genocide itself against the Uyghur people in Xinjiang. Are we seeing China transport any surveillance technology or methods that they're using against the Uyghurs to Moscow?
I think it's a more relative question for our intelligence and for our military. From cases we have in my office, I have no information of such scale, but if you have such information and if you share with us, of course, we will start our check.
Let me ask you about sanctions. Following the invasion of Ukraine in 2022, the United States sanctioned Vladimir Putin and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Following the 2014 invasion of Crimea, sanctions were levied against 11 Russian State Security Council members. In your opinion, has U.S. sanctions effectively cut off individuals who are enabling and supporting these war crimes? And are there individuals that would be effective to sanction who the United States or the West has not yet sanctioned and who you believe are responsible for these war crimes?
I think that it's extremely important to proceed with sanctioning Russians. And first of all, I would say Russian banks, Russian nuclear industry, because you all know that Russians' attacks on Ukrainian nuclear power stations, they raise risks globally, and they use it blackmailing practically the world, and the world should be strong in order to resist this blackmailing and sanctioning more on Russian nuclear industry. And I will add, if you allow, it's important. In cases of deportation of Ukrainian children, we have information about dozens or even hundreds of Russian officials, even of lower level, in the regions who were involved in this policy. And sanctioning them will also play deterring effect for the others, for Russian officials who should think before taking part in these war crimes.
Please share with us the identity of those Russian officials so that we can share with Treasury and recommend sanctioning those individuals who forcibly separated children from their families.
We will do it. Thank you.
I yield. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Congressman Barr. And we now proceed to Congressman Colin Allred of Texas.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Prosecutor General, for being here today and for your incredibly powerful testimony. We held 3 hearings on this topic in the last Congress, including one where you were a witness, but I am glad that we're holding another one today to make sure that the American people can hear again, and as many times as it takes, what Russia and Vladimir Putin is doing to Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. It bears repeating that your office has opened 80,000 investigations into war crimes. The Russians have caused 22,000 civilian casualties. At least 465 children have been killed by them. At least 120,000 civilian buildings have been destroyed in Ukraine. And far worse, as you've detailed today, a planned and systematic use of rape and torture of Ukrainians, the use of sexual violence against Ukrainian women, torture chambers, filmed beheadings, electric shocks, severe beatings, forcing Ukrainians to listen to and sing pro-Russian songs, and maybe worst of all, the abduction of nearly 20,000 that we know of Ukrainian children, taken from their families, indoctrinated to erase their Ukrainian identity. I have constituents in Dallas, Texas. I ask them to think of their families. I have a 4-year-old son and a 2-year-old son. There is nothing that I would not do to get them back. And I know you feel the same way. And we support you in that. This, put simply, as many of us have said today, is genocide. So when I hear voices in this Congress or other leaders in this country question our support to Ukraine, I wonder if they've forgotten who we are. We're the United States of America. If we can do something to try and prevent this, to push back against this, then we should. It's who we are. It says a lot about who we are. And I want to, in addition to congratulating the Ukrainian people on your incredible bravery, the way and the skill with which you've used the aid that we've given you, also say that President Biden has done an incredible job putting together an international coalition that has allowed us to get to this point to where I know you will win. I look forward